Rise and Fall of AJ. Welcome to Round 1 Boxing, everybody. Today we'll be taking a look at the rise and fall of Anthony Joshua. It'd be unfair to say British boxing was experiencing a slump in the late 90s, but it had a new lease of life injected into it by a wave of British world champions such as Carl Froch. Around the same time, a young Anthony Joshua walked into Finchley ABC at 18 and learned how to box. He won an ABA senior title in 2010 in just his 18th bout. A short time later, he turned down £50,000 to turn professional. Continuing to make waves in the amateur ranks, Joshua won a silver medal in the 2011 World Championships alongside Luke Campbell and Andrew Selby. The omens were looking good for this talented GB squad. Joshua lost by 1 point in the final, so he had exploded onto the elite level of the amateur game just 3 years after walking into a boxing gym for the first time. Joshua had his eyes set on the London Olympics, arguably the biggest ever sporting event in the UK. He came away with a gold medal and home glory after a tough run in the Olympics and some very close fights. But irrespective of whether the fights were extremely close, Joshua had announced himself on the scene as one of the top prospects of his generation. After bringing home a gold medal in London, promoters were keen to give him a top contract to join the pro ranks. Eddie Hearn was the promoter who managed to turn Joshua's head and convince him to join the pro ranks under the banner of Matchroom. The anticipation was huge for Joshua's debut, and he didn't disappoint in the early stages of his career. Joshua won his first 14 fights by knockout and picked up the Commonwealth heavyweight strap. He then went into his first PPV event against fellow Londoner Dillian Whyte. It was considered his first significant test in the pro ranks, as Whyte had beaten Joshua in the amateurs. Joshua was brought to the ring by grime superstar Stormzy, and the crossover appeal of the heavyweight superstar was becoming apparent. Following an entertaining fight where both men landed some heavy shots, Whyte was knocked unconscious in the 7th round, and Joshua set himself up for his first shot at the world title. American Charles Martin, who held the IBF title, was announced as his next fight. Martin was considered the weakest of the champions on offer. But considering Joshua had only 15 fights under his belt, it was an appropriate time to fight a suitable fighter. Joshua soon became the face of some major brands in the UK and internationally after demolishing Charles Martin. Then, after following 2 successful defenses of his IBF strap, he was set for his toughest test. A massive fight against the former undisputed Ukrainian legend Vladimir Klitschko. In what is now regarded as one of the greatest heavyweight title fights, both men touched the canvas before Joshua had Klitschko reeling in the penultimate round. He added the vacant WBA and IBO titles to his IBF belt. Following this victory, the brand of AJ took off into another dimension. Often featured on the biggest talk shows in the UK and the USA, he became one of the most recognizable sports figures in the UK. He would often advertise household-named products and was named the most marketable athlete in the world later that year by Sports Pro magazine. Due to criminal issues earlier in his life, Joshua's turnaround to become an Olympic gold medalist and hold 3 belts at the top of the heavyweight division was an inspirational story for many people. This is where Joshua's career peaked. Following defenses in stadiums, his fights would attract 70,000 plus in attendance and millions tuning in around the world. Then, in March 2018, he added the WBO title to his collection when New Zealander Joseph Parker took him 12 rounds for the first time in his career. With only the WBC belt the only title evading him, talks of crunch matches against fellow Brit Tyson Fury and American knockout merchant Deontay Wilder, who held the WBC title, were often discussed by experts, fans, and analysts. However, the next step for AJ was the Big Apple, Madison Square Garden, arguably the most iconic boxing venue on the planet. His opponent was announced originally as Jarrell Miller, but unfortunately, the unbeaten American failed a series of drug tests, so Eddie Hearn found a suitable replacement in capable Californian Andy Ruiz. Although Ruiz had a respectable record, he wasn't considered a threat to Joshua. Despite this, the announcement was ridiculed on social media due to pictures of Ruiz's physique. In hindsight, the term "don't judge a book by its cover" springs to mind. Ruiz seemed routine for a fighter like AJ, who had flattened Vladimir Klitschko, Alexander Povetkin, and Dillian Whyte. Not to mention, AJ had handily outboxed Joseph Parker, who had defeated Ruiz. It was deemed to be a pretty straightforward night's work. Ruiz appeared to be the ideal fighter to introduce him to an American audience. The AJ brand was at its pinnacle during this period. He was the face of British sports, some might say. He was also one of the most famous faces in boxing. Following spectacular nights in stadiums all over the UK, it felt like the sky was the limit for him, and this would be another day in the office. However, as boxing has shown us so many times over the last century, you can never overlook an opponent and take your foot off the gas. When you're a champion, every challenger looks at you as their once-in-a-lifetime shot. Ruiz certainly saw it that way and took the opportunity with both hands, literally. As we all know, the fight seemed to be going to plan for AJ. He had Ruiz down in the third, and as he went in for the finish, Ruiz landed a left hook that began the downfall of AJ as we know it. It seemed to not only break his punch resistance, but also shatter the idea of an indestructible Joshua. It would be harsh to say the illusion or myth was shattered. Many armchair commentators and specialists like to say it was the end for AJ. Whatever way you look at it, it was a massive moment in boxing, arguably the biggest of the entire 2010s. Joshua was eventually stopped in the 7th round against Ruiz, the most significant heavyweight upset since Buster Douglas knocked out Mike Tyson was complete. The backlash from the fight was startling. It made huge news in the UK and internationally. Promoter Eddie Hearn arranged an immediate rematch in Saudi Arabia 6 months later. Could Ruiz do it again? The second fight was a more measured and composed version of AJ, as he kept Ruiz on the end of his jab and boxed to a comfortable 12-round victory, becoming a 2-time champion. Although victorious, questions still lingered in the minds of boxing fans. Ruiz came in drastically overweight, and although he was hardly Arnold Schwarzenegger in their first fight, he was clearly not in a good enough physical condition to perform similarly to their fight 6 months earlier. In a little less than a year, Joshua had gone from selling out stadiums to being knocked out in the United States and boxing to a relatively stagnant 12-round victory against out-of-shape Ruiz in the Arabian desert. Added to that, the fanfare that usually surrounds a Joshua fight wasn't there either. Even though he had regained all of his titles, the brand needed to be repaired. Following such a devastating loss, rebuilding this image would take a while, even though he had avenged it comfortably. After defeating Kubrat Pulev via knockout in front of a small crowd due to COVID restrictions, it seemed like his ferocious and spiteful punching was coming back. As a result, public opinion appeared to be rising in his favor again. With an all-British mega-money undisputed heavyweight championship fight on the line against Tyson Fury now looking like a possibility in 2021, casual fans began to take notice of Joshua again. The WBO ordered Joshua's next fight, a mandatory against Alexander Usyk. One of the greatest amateur fighters of all time, Usyk had dominated the cruiserweight division and was now stepping up to challenge for world honors at heavyweight. Usyk would be a tough night for anybody in the division as an undefeated, highly skilled, technically proficient, and precociously talented fighter.
Just throw it.
Although Joshua was considered to have the upper hand due to his size, many experts picked Usyk for the win. That's precisely what happened. Usyk handed Joshua his second defeat after comfortably outmoving him for 36 minutes at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Joshua didn't seem to have any answers to the Ukrainian's incredible attacking prowess. However, it was notable that this version of Joshua was a far cry from the aggressive, hard-hitting fighter that flattened Dillian Whyte and traded bombs with Vladimir Klitschko. It looked as though the Ruiz fight might have had a lasting effect, and after ranking up his second defeat, he had shown there was more than one way to defuse Joshua and stifle his attack effectively. In the final round, Usyk might have finished the job if it lasted 30 more seconds. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine between the first fight and the rematch, the second fight took on an entirely new meaning for Usyk. He had a whole country behind him and was driven to succeed. Honestly, those who watched the first fight knew that Joshua couldn't have beaten Usyk, but instead, the masterful Ukrainian produced a carbon copy of the first fight, and now Joshua had 3 defeats on his record. One thing that definitely didn't help was Joshua's impromptu rant after the fight, where he seemed to give a winning speech despite losing. But unfortunately, in a rant that veered through various topics, a confused Usyk draped in the flag of his war-torn country simply didn't know where to look. Following the tirade, Joshua threw the belts out of the ring and participated in a vicious verbal exchange with somebody backstage. Eventually, he broke down into tears at the press conference as the magnitude and pressure seemed to take its toll. Operating at such a high level of sport and being such a public figure has affected AJ. In the age of Mayweather, the undefeated record is vital. Unlike the olden days when the best would fight the best, defeats didn't matter. Unfortunately, now it's held as a negative for fighters who dare to be great and is actively stopping big fights being made. It's hard to think of a fighter in recent memory who had the public popularity that Anthony Joshua did in the UK back in 2017. Unfortunately, this is likely to have played a part in his downfall. When you reach such a peak of celebrity, everything you do is scrutinized, and people become jealous. Unfortunately, it's human nature for many people to take pleasure in the downfall rather than rising of sports people. It's an ugly trait, and it's one that Joshua will know all too well after experiencing it so vividly. His quest to become a billionaire seems to have been shattered over 24 rounds by the phenomenal Usyk. At the end of the day, this shouldn't be the end for Joshua, but the way modern society seems to work, boxers are old news if they lose to other great fighters, so there's an upward struggle ahead. Joshua is no spring chicken either. At the age of 33, time isn't on his side. It's difficult to see how he reaches those dizzying heights he did back in 2017, but if he can climb back into the ring against Fury or Wilder, nobody would pick him to win those fights. He would be going there with far less pressure than he would have if he had fought them before Usyk dethroned him. AJ finds himself at a crossroads, but as Tyson Fury has proved, you can look down and out and come back very quickly with just a couple of big wins. The next 12 to 18 months could define his career and legacy. Be sure to click like and subscribe for more boxing content here at Round 1 Boxing.